As I said, I am Sarah Spreitzer. I'm an Assistant Vice President in Government Relations here at the American Council on Education. For those of you who may not know, government relations means that I liaise with Congress, with the administration on all of these fun issues around international students and immigration. And so we are very lucky to be joined today by two great speakers from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State. Adam Hunter, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Border and Immigration at the Department of Homeland Security, and Rosanna Kim, the Senior Advisor for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration at the U.S. Department of State. When we were planning this panel, this is the only panel with two speakers from the federal government. We know that there will be lots of questions, and we wanted it to be more of a discussion. And so I will be asking the panelists a series of questions, and then hopefully we will have time to open it up for the audience questions. But I wanted to start for folks who don't work often with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State. You know, both agencies have roles to play for immigrants and for non-immigrants arriving in the United States. And just as background, they play different roles in administering the laws and policies on admitting immigrants and non-immigrants into the U.S. DHS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, approves immigrant petitions. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement at DHS operates the Visa Security Program in selected embassies abroad. And then Customs and Border Protection at DHS inspects all people entering the U.S. The State Department is the one that actually issues the visas for those arriving in the United States. And so I just wanted to provide that context before we turned over to the panel. So my first question is actually for Deputy Assistant Secretary Hunter. And it is that ACE, along with the other higher education associations, many of which are on this meeting today, have worked to advocate for flexibilities for displaced students and scholars from Afghanistan and the Ukraine. DHS and the State Department have announced several actions, including temporary protected status for those in the U.S. from the Ukraine and Afghanistan, as well as the recently announced United for Ukraine program. Deputy Assistant Secretary Hunter, can you speak a little bit about those federal efforts that are ongoing?
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, colleagues, and also good morning to Rosanna, with whom I've had the pleasure to work pretty extensively on a lot of these issues over the past couple of months. I wanted to start by acknowledging, our immigration system is an alphabet soup, quite literally, of different visa options and pathways, and each one has their own particular rules and requirements. If you introduce then crisis situations on top of that, you actually lose some fidelity of those existing tools, while at the same time other avenues can open up. And we see this really acutely in student visas, right? Where students are temporary visa holders. They have certain limitations that are placed on the issuance of their visa, and it is the burden of that applicant to overcome a presumption of immigrant intent under the law. So if you enter a crisis situation, you might not have the available documents. You might not have a clear answer determination when you are able to return home, and certainly don't have a flight booked. That burden becomes all the more difficult. So we see that tool, loses some of its fidelity. Then we also have, as Rosanna will speak to, our U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, and there's some specific innovations in the work that allow people who, as a cause of their nexus to a protected ground and seeking that protection, can come and be facilitated to come to the United States. And then I'll speak briefly to some domestic efforts, and then I'll go back to what we've done most recently. On the domestic side, the Department of Homeland Security is able to afford flexibilities for people who are already in the United States, but are not then able to return home. So the first major tool that we have executed both in the Ukraine And in the Afghan context, also recently Cameroon and several other countries, is temporary protected status. So this allows individuals who are in the US, whether they have a current visa or whether they do not, equally, to apply and get a reprieve, a temporary protection that also makes them eligible to employment authorization. And that is an 18-month designation, but they have to be already in the US by the date specified in that designation. Concordant with that effort, we issue special student relief. So ICE also manages CVIS and the F1 visa program for the DHS equities there. And as a requirement of the F1 program, students are not able to work, but recognizing the same types of conditions under the law that the Secretary can invoke temporary protected status, we can also extend flexibilities to certain F1 students from those countries that will allow them to work and earn an income while still in their student status, recognizing that they are not going to be able to support themselves or return home as timely. In the Afghan and Ukraine context, most recently, we have used the Secretary's parole authority. So this is a discretionary authority within the Department of Homeland Security that grants individuals the ability to stay temporarily in the US, and if paroled for more than a year, generally have access to employment authorization. So this was the mechanism, the kind of legal mechanism by which we were able to welcome 78 to 80,000 Afghans. And that is the basis underpinning the process we announced yesterday, Uniting for Ukraine, that is a flagship commitment to deliver on the president's aim of welcoming up to 100,000 Ukrainians who are seeking refuge. Those processes, though, have drawbacks. They do not afford a permanent immigration status. They are seen as temporary. In the case of Afghans, there are many Afghans who are still able to adjust to special immigrant status or could avail themselves of the asylum system once they're here. In the Ukraine context, there may be other immigration pathways available also once they're here if they have family already in the United States or certainly have grounds to seek an asylum claim. But this is meeting a temporary need for Ukrainians who have ties in the US. And what is new is that we are really broad in how we're defining the individuals and the organizations that can support them. So it is beyond a family nexus. It could be friends, it could be associates, it could be former classmates, it could be individuals representing entities that are looking to support Ukrainians for this temporary stay in the US who can participate in this program once we launch on Monday. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Adam. And I should note, DHS and the State Department have acted very quickly to issue this kind of updated guidance or new policies or new programs to support these displaced students and scholars. But you are constrained by the existing law. And unfortunately, Congress has not been able to take any action to kind of update our immigration system. I think President Goodman noted that in his previous remarks. And so we are very grateful for the actions that DHS and state have taken so far to support these displaced students and scholars. Rosanna, can you speak a bit to, we know that the State Department has engaged closely with the higher education community in the federal response in supporting Afghans and Ukrainians who have been impacted by these crises. Can you speak to the role that the higher education community has played in supporting these relocated students and scholars?
Sure. So thanks so much, Sarah, and good morning to everybody. And I also want to start by just saying thank you to Rutgers Global for convening this really timely discussion. It's a pleasure to join this conversation and do so with my colleague, Adam at DHS. So Sarah, at the top, you mentioned, so I sit in PRM, the Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration at the State Department, and we lead on overseeing and administering the U.S. Refugee Admissions and Resettlement Program. And it's in that context that I thought I'd answer your question by using it as an opportunity to reflect on the historic domestic resettlement effort that's been underway since last August to resettle the more than, or roughly 80,000 Afghans that we've relocated to the United States. And I think, as so many of you know, this resettlement effort has been truly unprecedented, and one that has, strained our already overstretched resettlement architecture. And at a moment when many of our core resettlement agency partners were rebuilding after a period of having their architecture decimated in previous years. But one of the most powerful, I think, takeaways have come out of this moment, and a silver lining of the response that was mobilized to kind of meet the moment, was that we've seen many, what I would call sort of non-traditional resettlement actors step up in really extraordinary ways to help us meet the moment. And I would identify the higher education community as one of those actors. And so I think, in the past 8 months that we've been working on this effort, we've seen colleges and universities really play an absolutely critical role in providing kind of core resettlement support and services to Afghan students and scholars in ways that I think are new, both for those institutions and also for us at the State Department. And it's been really terrific to kind of see those innovations happen organically over time. And I think we've seen this in a number of ways. So one way we've seen it is with colleges and universities partnering really closely with our core resettlement agency partners. And this happens in a model that we would refer to as co-sponsorship. And I think it's a model that's also used by groups like Every Campus a Refuge, which I think many on this call will be familiar with. Another model that's emerged is colleges and universities essentially assuming a form of what I would consider private sponsorship through a new program that we've set up for this moment called the Sponsor Circle Program for Afghans, a program that we launched in close partnership with the Community Sponsorship Hub and a coalition of other organizations. And in that program, we've seen sponsor circles formed from members of the higher education community, faculty, staff, students also chipping in to really take on and lead in providing for those core resettlement services, providing all the same kinds of supports that we would traditionally expect of a resettlement agency. And I think in those examples, it's also been really powerful because they've been able to mobilize the unique and specialized resources that a higher education institution is able to bring to bear to meet the specific needs of an Afghan student or scholar in ways that I think are really powerful and can add to what a resettlement agency would normally be able to provide. And I'm also aware in that context that had those institutions not stepped up, it would be very unlikely that we would have been able to resettle those scholars, those students in those locations, help them fulfill and kind of take advantage of those academic opportunities. So I think it's been really terrific to see. And I also think that, going forward, as we reflect on this moment, and I think both Adam and I, our respective departments are really still in the thick of it, but as we take time to reflect, I think a really big takeaway for me is that, the resettlement architecture has been transformed by this endeavor for the better, right? We've seen a real broadening out of all kinds of institutions and actors coming into this space. And I really hope it really marks a moment where we keep that going forward. I think the higher education community has such an important role to play in domestic resettlement. And for me, I think it's going to become a key fixture of this landscape going forward. So I think it's a really exciting moment. And I think, as I'm sure we'll speak to later in the discussion, I think there's a really exciting opportunity on the horizon with private sponsorship and what this administration is committed to building as part of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. But let me pause there and turn it back to you.
Thanks, Rosanna. Yeah, I think that there are some real lessons learned going through both of these things. And also, as we were talking in our planning session, what institutions went through during the start of the COVID pandemic in supporting international students who may have been impacted by whether or not they could return to their country. And so there's a lot of things that hopefully we're taking from what we're learning from these crises and will be applying in the future. But I wanted to ask both of you, obviously, you've been working with the higher education community, but if you're an institution of higher education that's kind of new to this work and you're looking to engage with the Department of State or with the Department of Homeland Security on these issues, how do you start that? Where do you get started? How can people best engage with the federal agencies in this work?
Great. Well, I'm happy to kick off and maybe build on the theme of my previous remarks. And Adam, please feel free to jump in. So I alluded to this, but I think one of the most concrete and most exciting opportunities on the horizon is this new pilot program that we are committed to launching by the end of this year for private sponsorship of refugees broadly. So all refugees who are admitted to the United States through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. And this will build on what we've seen from sponsor circles and sort of the other sponsorship programs that have been mentioned in this conversation. but it will not be tied or limited to any nationality. So it will be open broadly, which I think is exciting. And this pilot program is going to be linked to a new, what we call a Priority 4 or P4 access category in the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. But really the heart of private sponsorship and the goal is to broaden access to the program by enabling private sponsors, which could be universities, to identify, refer, and then apply to sponsor the students or scholars that they're referring to. Now, as part of this private sponsorship program that we're seeking to launch, we're envisioning that it will have two core components. The first is a matching component where we're going to be looking to pull from our existing pipeline and match those folks quickly with private sponsors as we launch our system. But the second component, and the one I think is most pertinent to this conversation, is what we're calling the identification component. So again, this idea that private sponsorship will be linked to the ability to identify and refer cases into our system to be processed. And it's through this identification component that I think we in the department and this administration broadly is really interested in and committed to helping facilitate what we call a university sponsorship pathway, which I know many of the folks on this call have been eagerly engaged in thinking through and advocating for. And really, again, the idea here is that we recognize that private sponsorship as part of the broader admissions program has the potential to really unlock some exciting uses of sponsorship as a vehicle for other types of pathways, whether that's an education-based pathway or a labor mobility pathway. But in this context, we're eager to really facilitate this university sponsorship pathway. And so key for us is, we're going to be creating that kind of policy vehicle and framework to unlock that, but we will, need, and it will be immensely important for the engagement of this community, colleges, universities, and the various institutions that you all represent to work with us in kind of helping to stand up that pathway. Without getting ahead of myself, what I think I can say is that we will be announcing more details shortly on the operational infrastructure that we're going to be looking to build for this pathway and the type of funding we're going to be able to provide. And so, please watch this space. I think you can keep an eye on the PRM website for more information forthcoming. But really, that will be the key place where I think universities and colleges can engage, right? We're going to need core partners to help us design and build a university sponsorship program. And we're going to need the expertise and engagement of this community to understand, how do we adapt the admissions program resettlement for this particular population, for students and scholars? How do we think about meeting their specific needs in this context? And how are we going to have to think about resettlement differently for this type of pathway, unlike what we've done in traditional resettlement? So my really call to action, my plea for this community would be to, please engage with us on this effort. I think it's going to be really exciting. And again, because this is through the refugee admissions program, if students and scholars are admitted through that pathway, they'll be admitted with refugee status, right, which gives them a pathway to permanent status here in the United States. And so I think it offers, another pathway alongside traditional student visas. And so I think, again, a really exciting opportunity for all of us to engage and build that together. So let me pause there and maybe turn over to Adam for the DHS perspective.
I'll just take 30 seconds, just because Rosanna's piece here, I think, is the critical and really the innovative one. And just, I'll note from my side that, higher education and your educators, your employers, your community members, and you have strong voice and resources in your community. So I just encourage everyone to think broadly of the collective assets that your own institutions bring to bear, not only in directly welcoming foreign students, foreign researchers and educators, but in enabling others in your community to be resourced with your technical know-how, with your can-do, with maybe other resources or innovations that you can help them to be better sponsors and better welcomers in their communities. I think that we all see through the Afghan context, with the Ukraine context, and going forward, this really is an all-of-society approach. And really requires innovative engagement and the best leveraging of assets, tools, authorities, and resources of multiple sectors. So I just encourage us all, as we are pushing ourselves, to think broadly on what it is we can do, think expansively about your roles in communities. That's all from me.
That's great. Thank you to both of you. And we have had a few questions shared in the chat. The first one, I think, is probably for Adam. Adam, you spoke a bit about SSR recently being granted for students from the Ukraine shortly after TPS was announced. Are there any plans in the future to tie SSR announcements more closely to TPS?
They are. I mean, they're different actions requiring different regulatory paperwork, but one follows the other pretty assuredly. So that is something that we do pretty automatically.
Okay, great, thank you. And then there was a couple questions about the U.S. Refugee Program and overall processing times. We know that the processing time is long. Can you speak to the processing time for the refugee program and whether or not that's actually a viable option for a student or a scholar looking to come to the United States?
Thanks, Sarah. I'm happy to take that. So, look, I think the real challenge with the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is it's really a pathway designed to give folks a durable solution for protection, right? But it's not designed as a fast or emergency tool, so it contrasts very differently from some of the more, I think, flexible avenues that Adam described in his remarks that are available in the broader kind of toolbox of legal pathways. I think the challenge here is that on average, we know it takes about 18 to 24 months for a refugee to be processed through the admissions program. And that is a real challenge. And I think as many here know, this administration is really committed to trying to work through that and to think creatively about how we can improve that processing time for our applicants. I think coming out of Afghanistan, there have been some interesting models that we're working through to see if we can do some kind of form of expedited refugee processing. But that all being said, this process is one that takes time, unfortunately, given the many sort of requirements and checks that are required to process people through that pathway. What I will say, though, for the context of university sponsorship is, I think, again, this is why this engagement and partnership and conversation with this community will be really critical. I think if we are to effectively unlock a university sponsorship pathway, we're going to have to think really hard, right, about some of these really key policy and operational questions. For instance, how do we essentially think about how we kind of coordinate the timelines between what it will take to process folks through the refugee admissions program and what it will take for them to secure the academic admission they need to a program, and how would we think about sticking up those timelines so that we can essentially think about if we can facilitate entry for a specific academic year, right? These are all really important and challenging questions, and this is why I think this is something that we're not going to be able to unlock on our own in PRM, in the State Department, and USG. It will require, I think, really close engagement with this community to understand sort of all those pieces and how we work together to really make that happen. So I know it's a challenging area, but again, I think why this conversations like this are really critical, will be critical to that effort.
And thanks, Rosanna. And that's a really interesting point about better aligning the timelines, right? Because I think some of the frustration is some of our students have offers to come and study and full scholarships, and then the refugee admissions process is longer. And so that's a really, really good and important point. Adam, there was a question also regarding the timing. Is given the Biden administration is offering to take in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees, and the system I think is already being tested with the number of Afghans applying for refugee status. Does USCIS have plans to kind of increase the number of personnel that are processing the requests, or anything to kind of take in these increased numbers that are going to be seeking refugee status?
So I'm going to try to answer briefly because it is in part a technical answer more than a policy answer. And what we are doing for the Ukraine context that is novel is we've developed a system that will allow electronic travel authorization to Ukrainian passport holders to be processed in a more efficient manner. So the parole authority emanates from the Secretary of Homeland Security, is delegated to the components, and there are various ways that individuals access that. I mean, in the Afghan context, we had CBP, of course, is the arbiter of parole at the port of entry, and we're facilitating on charter flights the vast majority of those Afghans who have been evacuated through that process once they have checks overseas to be paroled at the port of entry. We also at the same time have received a lot of affirmative requests from Afghans filing paperwork directly with USCIS and self-initiating that process. The challenge there is that process requires our Department of State partners to complete at the post end of things. And the vast majority of these applicants are still in Afghanistan, and we do not have representation to complete the processing and issue a travel document for the majority of folks who don't have passports. So there's a bit of a kind of logistical piece that is encumbered there. But our commitment, I can say, to our Afghan allies is not over. We are continuing to work on flights that are departing Afghanistan for processing. We are continuing to welcome our Afghan allies. I was at our National Conference Center here in Lansdowne, Virginia, last week to see our domestic operation where we are staging and welcoming those parolees and getting them into our resettlement networks, and that commitment will be ongoing.
Great. Well, we have 5 minutes, and Adam, I know that you have to jump off right at 11 a.m. Any final thoughts from either of you for this higher education audience that you would like to leave us with?
I can maybe offer some remarks. I mean, it'll just build on the theme of what I think you've heard me speak to. But really, I think for me, again, it's really a thank you to this community for all the work that you've done in this moment to respond to the need to welcome and support both Afghans, Ukrainians, and others, I think, who will be coming to avail themselves of educational opportunities here in the United States. This community has played such an important role, and my plea again would be to, I think, both in the context of resettlement generally, please stay engaged, find ways to plug in, and I think, again, what this moment has taught us for what we've just experienced with Afghans is that there's so many different avenues, right, to do this work. And, we can think really creatively about how best to position universities to plug in wherever you can based on the particular resources or assets you're able to leverage. And so just because one opportunity may not be the one that fits for you, maybe it's not, maybe it's working with a resettlement agency, maybe it's not, maybe it's providing certain kinds of services or others. But I'd really encourage everyone to stay engaged in that effort. I think you all bring such tremendous expertise and insights for this particular population, but it will be important for us to just, again, to sustain and to build into the fabric of our resettlement infrastructure going forward. So that would be my plea. And then again, I think more coming soon on university sponsorship. So please be on the lookout for that. And of course, I'm very happy to, stay engaged with this audience as we roll out more information on that program. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.
Then I'll just echo the really astounding and innovative partnerships that I've been able to see higher ed and a range of different sectors play in the Afghan resettlement context. I mean, this is really broaching new ground, and there's a lot of elements of this that I think are very worth getting into sustainable footing, carrying forward to complement all of the kind of refugee processing innovations that will be forthcoming, and to really catalyze how American communities are much more involved in these processes. And then finally, just, as an observation, as a plea, we are challenged, all of us, in that our immigration system allows a range of tools, but it's very hard to see the collective sum of those parts. And these are a range of tools, a range of visas that fit particular circumstances or particularly suited individuals for various reasons. And it's really hard to pull together kind of the bigger picture of what is available and what we're trying to do. So we always appreciate and the engagement and dialogue and the recommendations of this field in kind of making the strategic case, in knitting together the full range of options that America has to put forward in welcoming students, but also in welcoming people from all over the world for a variety of reasons, and the leadership role that you're playing, because as Rosanna noted, I mean, we are in a build. I mean, we are building from a deficit. We are not yet at baseline, and we have huge ambitions for where we want to go in all of these programs all at the same time, so that our hope is what we can seed here together is going to result in a much more visible and much broader collective sum of parts to have a range of things available for students in particular circumstances, those who are meriting humanitarian protection, STEM talent, you name it. It's all on the table, and we're all working towards things that can hopefully be lasting and building the infrastructure to support it. So just a word of thanks. Thank you.
Well, and I'm going to say thank you to both of you, Rosanna and Adam, for being with us this morning. And we're just grateful for the partnership with the Department of State and with the Department of Homeland Security in addressing these very complicated issues. So thank you so much. Anu, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Adam and Rosanna, for a very, very informative discussion. I think it's very empowering to hear all the wonderful work that you're doing and the commitment of both yourselves and your departments.